sales executive for our range of audio creation products at Solid State Logic. As I said, I'm lucky enough to look after Italy as a territory, and we work with MIDiWare, our distributor here, and who I'd like to thank, along with the park and to RECnMIX for all being here and making this workshop happen. So, we always like to start with a brief history of the company to show how we got to where we are today. So, we were founded in 1969 by Colin Sanders, who you see pictured here. He began by making switching systems for church organs. Now, originally, church organs would require looms of cables that ran around old buildings, and there'd be a physical way that you'd have to pull out stops and pulls to make the air pass through the pumps to essentially make a sound. And Colin, who had a background in electronics, found a way to migrate this system to electronics. And he built a switching system like you see pictured here. And this worked using a multiplex system, it was called, and it essentially allowed the signal to pass when it was green, and it stopped when it was on red. The system used solid-state components and logic gates, which is where the name solid-state logic came from. Most famously, the Royal Albert Hall pictured here used this system. And the company that makes them still exists today, although separate from where we are at Solid State Logic. So, how did we get on to be a mixing desk company? So, Colin had a passion for music, namely choral and folk, and like all of us, he wanted to build a home studio at home. So he went on to do so in a town called Stonesfield, which is around 7 miles from where our international HQ is today. He called the studio Acorn Studios, and it was in a porter cabin next to his family home. They became a record label called Acorn Records that went on to release a few tunes, and when he'd set this up, he began to search for his console. He decided when looking that there were no consoles out there that did what he wanted to do. So he decided to build his own console, and he called it Acorn Console after the studios. And this is different to consoles that we have today because it was a split system. So using the experience that he had with the switching systems, he found a way to cleverly build in the center section of here. There was one button which essentially allowed the incoming signals that are on the left to switch to the right hand side, which was the mix out. And this also, it featured the first iteration of the bus compressor. Now, engineers would come to Acorn Records and they would use the console, and they began to ask how they could buy one for themselves. So he sold 2 consoles to the engineers, and the one that you see pictured here is in fact the 3rd unit that was made, and he actually painted this one, the chassis, black, unlike the others. So from here, Colin decides that it's time to start a company. The first official release was in 1978, and it was the SL4000B. This was the first inline console that we made, and it featured a couple of cool things. So firstly, it had a 6-inch CRT screen in the middle, and this allowed for things like VCA automation, which gave the engineer creative control over the mix, similarly to how we work with the DAW today. It also, the channel strips also featured a mono bus compressor, and this is modelled, these channel strips have been modelled in the 4KB plugin that we have today. It also had tape machine control at the desk, and this was great. It meant studios no longer had to have operators and external tape control machines. The engineer could do this all at the desk, and it gave him creative control. There were 6 of these made, and they were all made in the porter cabin in Acorn Records. And at this time, it was a cottage industry, meaning there wasn't lots of consoles being made and sold, but it still led to many countless records being made on this console. Next, in 1981, the SL4000E was launched, and this changed the industry because it featured total recall. Now, before this, engineers and musicians would need to lock themselves away in the studio waiting to finish the track. But when Total Recall was created, it meant that all you'd need was the tape deck and the recall settings, and you could recall and match all of the mix that you'd achieved before. Again, this is the same workflow we have today when we open up our DAW. This is what the Total Recall used to look like back in the 80s, and it's also, this is to show you how it looks today, which is in duality console, which features advanced switching and multi-operator recall. So after the success of these series, work continued to develop the consoles, and line and mic circuits were developed for lower noise floors. And also developed was a variable bandwidth EQ, which allowed for broader cuts and boosts. So the E series is a more aggressive EQ, which as you boost the gain, it will remain constant. However, the G series is a more broader, so as you boost the gain and release, you get more, you can achieve more broader cuts and boosts. Now, some people still prefer to the aggressive E series, but rock engineers, for example, would prefer the G series. But we started to make consoles with half E and half G series that would ship out to people. Both of these are the 2 EQ curves that you can get in the channel strip plugin today, which when we look at the UC1, we'll be able to look at those. Now, the major evolution was for our super analog preamps, and you may not know exactly how the super analog preamps are made, so we like to go into a few technicals to show why they're different to some of the other pro audio equipment that we use. So, the story begins in 1989, and after the release of the SL4000G, we continued to push the limitations of analog. The philosophy was for it to be like you were standing in the room with musicians. So why would you want to take time to set musicians up and set instruments up for that sound to hit the console and for it to ultimately change the sound? So some clever engineers set out to make a bespoke preamp circuitry which used DC coupled signal path. And this was to create a lower noise floor, extremely low distortion, and an ultra clean natural sound. And this is where super analog is born. The first SSL product with super analog was the SL9000J in 1994. Then it was in the SL9000K in 2002, the AWS in 2004, and Duality in 2008. It's also featured in the front end of our live and broadcast consoles, and you'll also find it throughout our range of audio creation products like Six and Big Six, as well as the pure drive preamps that we've launched recently. Now, there were a number of design choices that were made that make this different and to achieve that ultimate hi-fi sound. And you probably know how a valve affects a signal. It makes it warm and musical by introducing second harmonic distortion. Now, to understand how the super analog circuit makes that very clean sound, we'd like to just point out a few of the design choices that we made. So, the first one was there are no transformers in the super analog preamps. The preamps are DC coupled, and this doesn't mean that transformers are bad. In fact, sometimes clumps of iron are exactly what you want in a mix to to bring out certain elements of a mix. However, that is cumulative. The results are cumulative, and if you are pushing 48 transformer channels as an input, you may get some woolliness and muddiness in the low end, and that's because transformers distort in that 400 to 600 hertz region. So going back to the design philosophy of this super clean sound, we use DC coupled instead of the transformers in the signal path to keep the integrity of the recorded signal and allowing for less muddiness in that range. We like to say that you can add more colour to a mix, but you cannot take it away after. The second design choice was to use no VCAs on the fader, and whilst they're undoubtedly useful, they can produce audio artifacts such as linear distortion and noise. So to counteract this, we developed a technology called MDAC, which is essentially a high precision D to A converter, and it uses digital signals to control an analog gain stage. And that's opposed to using an analog signal to control an analog gain stage. This doesn't only reduce those unwanted audio artifacts, but it also allows you to use the same analog fader for DAW control. The third design choice was to use no capacitors in the audio signal path, and there's 4 factors that make a difference with this. So this is a measurement graph from a studio magazine in Germany, and it shows 2 of the reasons why we made this decision. So the first is the red line, and this is the frequency response. By nature, a capacitor will change the sound dependent on the distance between the plates, the material between those plates, as well as the charge in between the plates. And in reality, that manifests itself as an EQ curve. We typically measure frequency response in -3 decibel points of a level drop. And as you can see by the red line on here, we get a -3 dB point drop at 200k mark. Most importantly, computers only think that 20 hertz to 20k hertz is what exists. So we're essentially talking about a really linear amount of frequency response in that range. The second part of this is the blue line represents the phase response. And as you can see with here, we've got a linear line between 100 hertz and 10k hertz. This is important because it defines the ability for good stereo imagery and even sort of a wide super sound stage and a deep front back end range sort of sit reverbs in. For this reason, hip hop guys really like to mix on SSL desks because they can keep the phase consistency in the bottom end, and it means you can have a deeper, fuller mix in that range more than any other console. So, by having no capacitors, we've achieved an ultra-wide frequency range and a linear phase response, but the next benefit to do with this is to do with speed. So, think of a capacitor like filling a glass of water from a tap. It takes a limited amount of time to fill the glass, but then a quick amount of time to empty it. And this is effectively how a capacitor works. So if you imagine a sound source with lots of transient information and the circuit is waiting for it to fill up before it releases, you may lose some of those initial transients and the first milliseconds that our brain uses to process the sound. So if we use no capacitors, we're achieving a faster reaction, and it means that we can pick up all of the subtle nuances in a tone. Of course, there's still a situation to use a valve tone like this. Perhaps you have an aggressive sort of rock singer and you want to lose those initial transients in the tone. Using capacitors is essentially a slower reaction time. But again, remember you can always add colour, but you can't remove it after. And then the last reason for not using capacitors in there is if you is about recapping consoles. So this is when a desk has got so hot that the electrolytic material between the plates has dried out and it has an effect on the EQ curve. So to fix this, you have to replace all of the capacitors and they need to be soldered on individually. And if you think of a 64-channel console with 40 channel strips in there, that's 2,560 caps. So a lot of work. So by not having capacitors, we significantly reduce the maintenance, but it also means that the desk, it sounds the same out of the box as it did 10 years ago. So we do know that distortion can be cool too. So we've also created a new analog technology called variable harmonic drive, which is also known as VHD. And this is clever in how it works because if you treat it nicely in the green, it acts like a super analog circuit, ultra clean. But if you start to drive it, you can start to introduce second harmonic distortion like a valve or third harmonic distortion like a transistor. And you can also blend the two of those. There's also variable control to blend the two of those, which gives a much wider range of sonics. So that's a brief history about the company and the technologies. Now I'd like to talk about how we bring the modern studio together with our range of ACP products. So we have a few images here from our socials, and I think you can probably see some similarities with what you have at home. So firstly, a bedroom producer who has an audio interface there, and a writing room which starts to incorporate preamps and DAW controllers with MIDI instruments, and a hybrid studio where we start to introduce outboard gear. So, what do all of those studios have in common? They are all centred around a computer. And when we think of luxury SSL studios with analog consoles, the best thing about those is the muscle memory, the creative control and the hands-on mixing experience you have, and also that you can spend more time listening rather than looking at the screen and moving around with a mouse and a keyboard. So, now I'd like to talk about how we can have designed a way to emulate this control with our range of controllers. So I will in fact change this screen so that we can have a look at our 360 software here. So sorry, I have my computer's having a bit of a hard time. Here we go. Perfect. So, we'll talk about our range of controllers first, and then we have the opportunity to go and look at some of our analog gear after. But this is our range of controllers in front of me here. And they are perfect for anybody that wants to completely optimize their workflow at home by giving this really nice hands-on approach. They are all modular and they can be added together to create the perfect control surface to suit your needs. So we firstly have UF1 here, which is a single fader DAW controller, which gives full comprehensive control over your DAW. We have UF8 here, which is an expandable 8-fader DAW controller. And we have UC1, which is a hardware plug-in controller. Now, UF1, as you can see here, we have a single motorized fader. We also have, and this is looking at each track within our DAW. And we can also set it to be a master fader. We have the display here, which gives us analysis of our track and metering. Below we've got 4 virtual pots, which we can use to control things like sends and plugins. Above here we have 4 soft keys, and they can be set up to do your own keyboard macros and shortcuts to really improve your workflow. Below here we've got a channel encoder to move through our banks. We've got zooming in and navigation through our session using the arrows here. And we've got first and secondary transport controls, as well as a scrub wheel to navigate through our track. UF8, we've got the same, we've got 8 motorised faders here. At the top, we've got the same user assignable soft keys to really improve and optimise our workflow. We've got the 8 TFT displays through the middle, and all of these displays are showing the track name, the current assignment to the VPOP beneath it, and the user assignable label that we've got at the top. Down here, we have an automation section. We've got send and plug-in controls that we can navigate through here. On the right-hand side, we have soft keys where we can move through our pages of user assignable keys. And below, we've got how we set selection mode, where we set up whether we want to record, set record arms or selection arms on our track. Navigation through our session here, and again with the zoom control. Now, the UC1, this is set up to be, it's a dedicated SSL plugin controller, but what's amazing about this now is we actually have third-party plugin control too, which we'll look at during our demo. But this features on the left-hand side a high and a low-pass filter and a parametric EQ. We've got the dynamic section with compressor, expander and gate on the right-hand side. In the middle we have dedicated bus compressor section, gate input and output gain controls here, and on the display we can move and we can control our routing, we can pick up presets, and we've got all of the solo cut and record arms on the right. So that's a quick explanation of the controls, but now I'll start I'll open up the 360 software and show you as you connect how quickly we can start to use these controllers to optimize our workflow. Just have a quick sip of water. So, each of these controllers have a through input by USB into each one. And so they're all linked, they all follow each other, and we have one single USB into our computer. They're all powered by our SSL 360 software, which is a centralised hub for all of our controllers. And you can see that they're all imaged here. In the 360 software, this is where we set up all of the soft keys, settings for all of the controllers.
You are not showing the computer.
Oh, that's weird because. Sorry about that.
No.
Is it good? Oh, because I set it up to duplicate, but hold on, let me do that. There's something that went different when I tried to do something, I think. Let me just get this out because I'd like to see what I'm doing in front of me. Okay. Is that better? Great. All set up. Yes, so here is where, once you've got them connected, they will all feature here, and this is where we update the firmware and control the settings for our controllers. So on the left-hand side here is where all of the controllers present themselves, and where we set them up, as well as in the settings. So what we can work with both of these, we can work out of the box. You're working with all major DAWs. And we can actually work simultaneously with 3 DAWs at one time. Today I'm going to be using Ableton, and I'm actually going to have, there's 3 different layers that you set up for DAWs, but with the controllers we also have We also have other controls that we can add, such as plugin mixers and MIDI CC layers that we'll go through. So I'll have these set up as in my UF8, as I've got Ableton Live as layer 1, plugin mixer as layer 2, and a MIDI CC layer as layer 3. So below here is where we set up our soft keys. So the soft keys being at the top here, and using we have 5 layers of soft keys on the UF8, and we have 10 layers on the UF1, and they will present themselves at the top there. As I said, they come out of the box. You're going to be presented with some already set maps for your DAW of choice. But the power of these really comes when you make user assignable ones, and you'll see I have a few that I've set up here, which I'll show you within the DAW. On the left-hand side of UF8 here, the quick keys are almost things that you're doing automatically all the time. So I have them set up to go between arrangement view, session view, for example. And with Ableton, with the Mackie control of Ableton, some of the sections are actually inactive by default, and this is to do with the protocol in which we communicate with the DAWs. But we actually have the opportunity to map these to our own user assignable keys as well. So although they're out of the box inactive, you can actually set them up to do all of the quick keys and the soft keys that you want to improve your workflow. The same in UF1. This is where we set up all of our user assignable keys. And again, in here, you can change all the things like brightness, but this is a centralized hub for the setup of these controllers. Now, once you set this up inside your session, inside your DAW, you'll see that all of the tracks will present themselves across the top, and you immediately have, if I go to session view here, you immediately have all of the fader control and the pan control within your DAW. We can open up, if we go, sorry, we can open up our, so we can open up our groupings by using the select arm here. We can use a channel encoder to navigate through our tracks, which you'll see are moving across, and they're being followed across all of my controllers too, because they're all following each other. We can set up record arms very easily on the selection mode here, and when we select that now, we're now selecting that as a record arm. And we can use the arrows here to zoom in and out of our session. If we hold this down, sorry, I will move it down there, sorry. That one there. Good, so if I just code this back to the front of my track. So, I've got the control over on UF8 there, and we've got the same controls over on UF1. So on UF1, we can actually set this up to be a single fader, where we're looking at one track, and you'll see on the screen here, we have the same control over the next 4 tracks. But as I'm using this as a control surface, I can also set this up to be a master, which if you're using this as a control surface, you prefer to probably have this as a master channel now, and we're now controlling the master of Ableton. We've also got the scrub wheel, transport controls where we quickly, and you'll just see that it's just giving you this really amazing hands-on experience to your workflow. What I've done here is I'll show you, because I've sort of flicked between a couple, which I apologise about. I'm going to just focus a bit on UF1, UF8, and then go to UC1 after. So, on UF1, you'll see here we've got the next 4 tracks across, and we've got the control of the, go back here, so on the mode button we're actually flicking between the control that's assigned to the VPOT below. And you'll see that I have, right, and I'll go back to session view here, I also have the fader control with these VPOTs here, I can move across to the next eight tracks and have failure control of that. So you'll see that as a single unit, it's still giving you full comprehensive control over the mix. We can also set this to be pans too. So again, we've got the same control of the UF8, but on this on the UF1 too. You'll also see that on the mode here, we've of course got the VU meters and the visual aspect that we can add, and this is how the screen benefits us and this control setup. We can change the different displays to be RTAs and to be phasing or meters, and we can also move through presets that's in our meter plugin. I mean, this actually comes with the meter plugin, which powers and gives us all the visual displays, and that's added to the master track and displays itself here. At the top here is all of the user assignable keys, and we can move through these across using the arrows. Down below is the navigation through the track and ways to quickly write automation and the transport controls at the bottom. On UF8, again, we've got the user assignable keys. We move through those by using the soft keys here. Below is the VPOTs. Now, we've got a couple of ways that the VPOTs can be assigned. So at the moment, it's a pan control, but we can also go into plugin control here. And now you'll see that the plugin that I have loaded on this track that I've selected is now appearing in the first fader. If I was to click that pot there, we now have control over that plugin across the VPOTs of our UF8. And we can move across with the page, and we've actually got plugin control of that plugin with UF8, and we've also got it on UF1. So as a family, of course, this all complements each other, but it's important to say even with the one unit, you've got the same plugin control that you have across the VPOTs. Below here, so as I said about the automation mode, because this isn't active in Ableton, I wanted to just quickly show you how I still set that up to be a way to record automation. So in the UF8 menu here, below is the automation section, which we can choose to be factory, which makes it inactive, or we can choose to be user. And all I have done as a workaround is created a key. I've mapped a key in Ableton, and then I've assigned that key to this control. And now, if I press that, then I'm automatically in automation mode. So you don't lose that function. We can still use it as a way to do it in Ableton. With the channel encoders as well, we've got this in navigation mode on. Navigation mode to scroll through the track, but we can also put it into focus mode, and this acts as a mouse emulation. You can scroll, and this, if you don't have the UC1, can be used for things like third-party plugins, again giving you the hands-on control. So then if you go, so the arrows are to move in and out of the track, or we can good. UC1, this is below the channel encoder here, is how we move through the tracks in our session. And you'll see that with the smart light controls that we've got, it's immediately showing the parameters for each control. What's great about these is it gives you a true analog-like performance because you can move multiple controls at the same time, and it's very quick in how it responds. Where on the right-hand side here, this encoder is how we pick the bus compressor. So you'll see I'm scrolling through there, and I've got a bus compressor on each of my buses, and I'm moving through those. Very cleverly, we emulated an actual compression unit digitally, which is a really nice touch on this because it gives you that analog-like feel. On the right hand side here is the channel controls for solo cut. We've got fine control too, so when we hold that we can really dial in a minute detail. And then on down below we can even directly from the hardware we can control the routing and we can select presets too. So that's how I'm using it in DAW control. But as I spoke about the different layers that we have earlier and the improvements that we've recently added to the VST3 connection that we can, the VST3 control via our plugin mixer, I'd like to now move on to layer 2 of my controllers, which I do by selecting the layer on the left hand side here. I do it on UF1 by holding down 360 and press the plugin mixer. And I will move on to, I'll go into 360 here and open up the plugin mixer. So you'll immediately see that there's a lot more information coming through on the controllers, and that's because we're communicating now with the plugins as opposed to through the DAW, through a control on the DAW. So I have more track names. You'll see that the track colours are also pulling through on all of the controllers. I have the metering of the channel strips, and on UF1 I also have a visual EQ curve for each channel strip that's selected. On so there's a couple. So I have started to use the plugin mixer now to mix more, and it's because we can now control our DAW faders and even panel controls directly from the DAW. So if we look at the plugin mixer that you can see here, this is essentially because I've added an SSL channel strip to each of the tracks in my Ableton session. As soon as I do that, the plugin will show in the plugin mixer here, and you have the control by mouse if you want it. You have the control with UC1, you have the control with UF8, and you have the control with UF1 too. And below we can also control, within the plugin mixer, we can also control send. So it depends on how what task you're doing, but for the final bit of mixing and for mixing and faders, etc., I'm now actually using the plugin mixer to do a lot of the work that I do. So if we move across to the right hand side here, you'll see that I want to move on to the new release of the SSL 360 link that we've launched. So I'm just going to go onto a track here and drag in SSL 360. This is a new piece of software which allows for third-party plugin control. And I want to show you that with the release of this, it allows us to even more flexibility to mix within this VST3 mixer layer. So, when we load a link plugin onto one of our tracks, it will be presented like this, essentially an empty map for the UC1. And the plugin, the 360 link actually hosts our VST3 plugin that we have. And when we load it up and search on our computer, it will automatically give you a list of all the VST3 plugins that you have installed. So I'm going to open up this native XEQ. This is of course SSL, but we can control any VST3 plugin. I mapped this to be if I just put 4 bands in here, that should have come up to default. So I have essentially mapped UC1 to be a 4-band EQ for the native X plugin. So I've easily now got control over that. The way that I set this up is very easy. It will come with some pre-mapped controls, but if I open up the settings section here, when we open up the settings, it presents itself with each parameter of our plugin, and we can very easily adjust them by clicking on the right hand side here and then clicking on the mapping on the left hand side. We can also do it very easily by clicking on there and also clicking the button on UC1. So it's very easy to map. As soon as we've mapped it, you can close this and close it, and every time you open it back up, those mappings will automatically be in place. So as soon as you've mapped your favourite plugin, it's very easy to recall those settings. The great thing about it as well is if we head back to the SSL 360 software, you'll see that it shows itself in the same format, but only the parameters that we've actually mapped. So some of the things, if you were mixing in the plugin layer, you may not necessarily have wanted to have an SSL channel strip on every one. But what's great with this now is we can load external compressors and EQs, etc., but anything, and you can mix it within the same layer. You have the same, if we go across onto here, we can also control, the controls also manifest across UF8 too and UF1, so you can also use those for the third party plugin control if it's not an S, but it's still mapped through UC1, but it displays the same functions. So that's a general overview of the controllers and how I'm using them. I'd like to invite anyone for any questions, but also to have a hands-on go if anyone would like to see anything specific and have any ways that I go about my session.
Domando, volete provare qualcosa?
Can the EQ section on the UC1 used as a controller for compressor?
Yeah, so absolutely. So for the third-party compressor, or just
anything, any compressor.
Good. So
maybe like a stereo compressor where the green part is used on the left channel of the mid channel and the blue part on the mono channel of the side channel.
So if I understand correctly, we can map any of these controls to a third-party compressor.
Yes.
Otherwise, the center section is a dedicated bus compressor section. This can't be mapped, this center section, but when we scroll through our bus compressors here, we can select which one we want and we immediately control those.
Yes.
Have I understood that correctly?
If I want to put a mid-side compressor, can it be mapped to the EQ section of the?
Yes. Okay. You can map any controls.
Anything to everything.
Yes. If I go back to this, and I'll load up a blank plugin. So if I just I probably don't have so many compressors here, but just to show you anyway, I'll open up a drum strip, and when we go onto the settings section here, and we can click anything, we can click it, and we can move one of the controls. So anything can be mapped to anything. We'd say when you're looking at something, because the words are there, it makes sense to map as an EQ and a compressor on the right hand side, but it's limitless. You can map any of those controls to do anything that you like. Good. I'd like, if everyone's more than welcome to come and have a go and to move through the session and see how they work hands-on.
Puoi provare direttamente?
Sta con la diretta, così magari qualcuno vuole provare, sta con la diretta.
No, se qualcuno vuole provare, se ci dà permesso continuiamo a stare in diretta. Qualcuno vuole provare a smanettare?
Sono tutti timidi.
Responsabilità però.
No, dove
Well,
Perché
we're
responsabilità?
Non so adesso. Volentieri. Dipende.
Sì,
vai, prova.
vai. Possiamo continuare, se vuoi spegniamo la diretta.
No,
Sì,
no,
sì.
per me non c'è problema con la diretta. Ma nel senso, trying to mixing on those tracks.
yeah, you can absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, just try. I never used any controller. I
Vai,
just.
vai. Grande.
il nostro uomo.
So just to
Can you help me in using the?
absolutely, yeah. No, I was just moving over to. So if we open up the plugin mixer here,
Okay.
here with this channel encoder, this is where you're going to be moving through the session.
Okay, with this one.
Yes, and you'll see that.
Okay. And where I see the name of the. Oh, okay. Is this one?
Yes, so you'll see that in each of the tracks here, you'll see on QFA, but here you'll see that it will present with the name of the tracking session.
Okay. So now I'm on the 17th channel, right?
Yes,
This is the synth.
yes.
Okay. Can you try to open the kick one? The kick channel?
The
Okay.
kick,
I'm on the kick now?
yes.
Okay.
So, yeah, so if you want this to follow, you take that off of master, and then you also presented the music with the EQ track.
Oh, okay. So this is the cube that I'm now doing with the.
That's right, yeah.
Okay. So if I press, okay. Now I'm in solo, right?
Yes.
So if I press play, I should hear it. Okay.
Sorry, we don't have the sound on here, but we can,
I
yeah.
was just trying to. Ooh, okay. So. Okay. Ooh, okay. This is really
So you
nice
can
to
see it's
use.
really nice, nice controls, isn't it? And that analog feel of being able to just to move a couple of
One
things at the same
question,
time.
please. The fader on UF8 are controlling the 360 mixer or Ableton mixer?
So, down below here, if you can see there, we've got the choice of plugin or DAW.
Oh,
So I have them set as DAW because I find that means that I can mix strictly in the plugin mixer. But you can choose to have plugin control. You'll see that the faders change how they look. And this is if you want to control the output of the actual plugin.
thank you.
Okay. So I can choose if with the fader I control, for example, the output of the track input.
That's it. So if you press plugin there, then you're controlling the output of the plugin.
Okay.
And if you turn it off, then you're controlling the output of the DAW.
Okay. Thank you. That was really smooth.
You really like that?
Thank you.
Good. So this, because I can leave them out too, and everybody's welcome to have a go. And we also want to look at some of the outputs in the studio for people to listen to.
Ok. Diciamo, oltre ai controller, potete continuare a provare ovviamente, di là c'è un'attività del Bass Plus Outboard, che lì dovreste provare a moving out of the room to make Bass Plus happen.
Yeah.
Ok?